enjoyed the break and some of these networking opportunities to get to speak with some of the panelists and some of our members. First, I want to just acknowledge Easy Prague and Veronica, who was our conference organizer and management team. We worked very closely with them, and it was really quite enjoyable. And our AV team, who are back there making everything run really smoothly. Liana Gent is now here. Hello, Liana. So I just wanted to let everyone know that our partner from the Step by Step Association is here. And I think really importantly is that we all recognize the staff here from the Forum on Investing in Young Children Globally. I'm glad to see Carrie just walked in the room, but I don't see Charlie because they're very busy continuing to make things run smoothly. And then Jocelyn, our consultant who you met earlier today, who was, there's Charlie, who is running the Everyone polls. So they're here to help and assist and continue to make sure things run smooth. So don't forget, or Everywhere polls, don't forget to keep logging in what you expect from the workshop. We're collecting those things, and that will guide our forum as we go forward. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Klaus in the next panel.
So welcome. I have a very, very brief presentation to share with you, which will give a little bit of an introduction to the session and also to Roma children in Europe. First, though, I'd like to introduce our panel. I am going to be moderating this panel alone. My colleague from London is caught in the fog, which is something you're going to hear a lot today. So her name, Ileana Serafian, won't be joining, but we are lucky that we have a complete panel, and our panel today consists of Margareta Matache, who's an instructor at the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard University, and she's going to be presenting to us on risks and protective factors that influence or impact the lives of young Roma children and their families. And then we will be hearing from David Greger. He is the Deputy Director for the Institute for Research and Development of Education at Charles University. And he has just completed with his colleagues and with Arthur also a study on that assesses the policies and services for young Roma children in the Czech Republic. And that study is a joint project, let's say, of the Roma Education Fund, UNICEF, and the Open Society Foundations. It's going to be officially launched on Thursday, but you get a preview today from David. After that, we'll have a policy reaction from Arthur Evatz. I think we're very lucky to have him here today. He's a consultant who's works with the Open Society Foundations, but in his previous life, he was one of the inspectors. He was the lead inspector in the United Kingdom, looking after Roma, Gypsy, and traveler children across the entire UK. And he has done a lot of policy work and work across all of Europe. So he's going to give us a European perspective on policy. And finally, we'll be hearing comments on the presentations from Ratosveta Dimitrova, who is the Kofas Forte Marie Curie Fellow at Stockholm University, Sweden. And she is a young Roma scholar who's going to bring her insights into research that's going on now that you'll hear today. So quick information. I think I've gone through this. We thought it would be good to give you a little information on the context of Roma in Europe for those of you who are let's say, coming across the issue for the first time in more detail. So 2015 marks the end point of something that's called the Decade of Roma Inclusion, which was a political effort of the World Bank, the European Union, the Open Society Foundations, and a number of other governments in the region, about 10 governments in the region, to try between 2005 and 2015 to make an enormous change in the lives of Roma generally, families, communities across all of Europe. And we're now at the end of that period, 2015, and there has been some progress, but really far too little progress. If we look at the situation now, the decade focused on 4 areas of life of Roma families and children. It focused on education, health, housing, and employment. I picked out for you just one statistic from each of those areas to give you the picture. Europe is, first of all, just demographically, it's Europe's largest ethnic minority. It's hard to estimate the numbers. Our colleagues will talk about that today because it's, of course, people self-declare their nationality or ethnicity across many European countries. and many Roma are afraid to do that. So it is estimated that there are 10 to 12 million Roma in Europe. It's the largest ethnic minority. Fewer than a third of the Roma population that's of employable age is employed. And that's because probably, I forget the exact statistic, I think it's about 15% in some countries are graduating from secondary school, which would mean they'd have a lot of the qualifications that are needed for some positions. So we see different levels of participation. So 20% never enroll into school, and at the same time we have to acknowledge that Roma communities are very diverse. We have here 2 Roma PhDs on this panel, and there are also Ileana, who is going to be here, also is working on her PhD. So there's a wide variety across education, but we can say 20% of Roma have never enrolled in school. Life expectancy is 8 to 12 years shorter for Roma. There's high infant mortality, and Roma are more likely to be evicted as a community than any other Europeans. I'll also add a statistic that 50% of Roma in the last year will indicate in surveys that they've been discriminated against. So the level of discrimination is really enormous. We don't see that in many other contexts. Those of you who went on a site visit yesterday, 2 of the site visits were looking at preschools or community-based preschools, and those preschools or communities that you visited had some Roma children in it, and I thought I would give you a slide to contextualize that a little bit. So what this slide shows is the rate of participation of children between the age of 3 and formal schooling in preschools in a number of European countries that have high Roma populations. And you can see, first of all, that the rates of participation in preschool vary a lot. So, of course, you see this is from 3 to 6. So we don't see, we see 20 to 40, let's say 30% or so participating in Macedonia, Italy, and Bosnia of the whole population. But what we see on average is that Roma children are participating at half the rate of other children in preschool. So what we find is that the most disadvantaged group in Europe has the least access to preschool education. And I bet if we further tackled that statistic, we would probably find that it is the higher income bracket Roma that are making more use of the preschools, and that those that are the poorest are probably having the hardest time getting into preschools. Secondly, I've done some work looking at how many Roma are employed in preschools and primary schools, and we find that if we wanted the population of teachers to look like the community, right, so there would be a proportionate number of Roma teaching in preschools and primary schools, we have only about 5% of the Roma we would need employed in the early childhood education teaching force. So that's another thing that we need to look at. Because when we interview Roma families, some of them who don't send their children to preschool would if there was a Roma person at the preschool. They'd be more comfortable. The biggest barriers to preschool attendance are that there aren't preschool places, or the preschool's too far, or there's no transportation, or there are direct or indirect costs associated with attending preschool. So most of the factors here are structural, but I do want to emphasize there are cultural issues too. So more Roma parents who could overcome those barriers would do it if there was a Roma person at the preschool. For those of you who visited the baby homes, this is a statistic that looks at Roma children in institutional care. So this is 0 to 18, it's not 0 to 3 like we saw the other day. But what you can see, just highlighting Czech Republic, if the Roma population is about 3% on average, we might say, of the Czech Republic population, it makes up 40% of the children in institutionalized care. So you see huge discrepancies, and really the largest discrepancies you see in Slovakia, where Roma make up 9% of the population, but over 80% of the children in institutional care. I think that you have this PowerPoint in your presentations, or it's available online. So if you're interested in more statistics about Roma, these are some of the sources that we use that we think are the better reports. I am, though, going to turn over now to Magda Matace, and she's going to talk about risk and protective factors affecting young Roma children.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to participate at this forum. Thank you, Sarah, for a kind introduction. Allowed me just to say that, along with my professional affiliations, I'm also a member of the Roma community from Romania, and I grew up in a Roma family and experienced some of the challenges that I'm going to talk about today. In my presentation today, as Sarah mentioned, I will try to touch upon some of the risk and protective factors that Romani children encounter in their closest environments during early years. And allowed me to start off by underlining that there is a alarming lack of data regarding the early development of Romani children, and therefore my presentation today, which is a case study on Romania, gathers information from different sources, different publications in relation to Roma, and put them together or correlate them with general global data on early development. As we all know, the child development is influenced by a continuous interaction between sources of vulnerabilities and sources of resilience. And among the sources of vulnerability that we meet, especially in relation to marginalized children, I think that the social and economic context, but also the school environment and also the family play an important role. And allowed me to start with the social and economic context by saying that this is a strong determinant in inequality in education, but also it affects on long-term employment, and it's an interesting aspect of what poverty means. And in relation to poverty, I think in the Roma field we are used to speak very generally, but some of the recent literature split up poverty in different elements, and I think that the geographic location, the physical proximity, and the neighborhood resources are some of the elements that we really want to look at when we discuss the risk factors associated with the social context and the economic context in which the Romani children live. And allowed me just to touch upon two of these aspects. One of them is the geography of the Roma communities. And many of you may know that a lot of the Roma communities in Romania, but also overall in Europe, they live in residentially segregated communities. And some Roma activists may argue that there are some positive aspects of this residential segregation, especially in relation to promotion of cultural rights and so on. But on the other hand, there are a lot of negative aspects. And in relation to early childhood, I just want to mention, for instance, segregation. You briefly touched upon it, and I think that along with many other forms of segregation in kindergartens and segregation in schools is led by the fact that many of these communities are isolated. And it's not just that the children are separated and they learn in their own environment, but segregation in education comes with a lot of other consequences. One of them is that the quality of education in Roma schools, in ghetto schools as they are called in some countries, is much lower than in the mainstream schools. On the other hand, the infrastructure of these school environments is lower and is not as good as the one where the non-Romani children learn. And even more, in some countries like in Romania, it was shown by the studies that the teacher absenteeism in the Roma school is much higher than in the non-Roma schools. And I think these are elements that we all have to look at when we discuss education of young Romani children. And even more, residential segregation leads to other problems. One is the fact that there is a lack of kindergartens in the Roma communities, and even more, some communities, although it may sound unrealistic, some communities are separated by walls in different regions, and this is an example in Romania, where in Baia Mare the mayor built up a wall to separate the communities. It's not the only example in my country. Another aspect of poverty that we want to look at is the resources that we have in the neighborhoods. And there are serious accessibility problems in many Roma communities, but also in Romania, 15% of the Roma families do not have access to electricity, and even more, 36% of the Roma families, they have difficulties to access drinking water. just to continue speaking about the influence of the socioeconomic status, we all know that studies proved already that children who grow up in communities that have a lower socioeconomic status, they tend to learn lesser words than the children who grow up in higher socioeconomic families. And although there is no data about the language development for the Romani children per se, I think that we can correlate this general information with the fact that 66% of Romani children in Romania live in poverty and 20% of them live in extreme poverty. And therefore, this is, if we correlate this with the language development, I think it's an important factor that we have to look at. And in addition to that, speaking more about vocabulary and language development, we do lack in Romania, as we also lack in Croatia, in Czech Republic, and in other countries, bilingual education. And that also has an impact on the language development of our children. We all know that malnutrition also triggers negative consequences on early childhood development, and in my country, 40% of the Romani children suffer from severe malnutrition. There are studies that show that every month, 40% of our families in the Roma communities, there is a person in that family that always go to sleep hungry. Another factor that I really want to touch upon is the stress syndrome that normally occur as a consequence of traumatic events. And I think this is a highly undocumented, highly undiscussed factor in relation to Roma community. And a very specific source of chronic stress in Roma community, I think, is discrimination and stigmatization. And there is no literature on that, but what I can say is that the NGOs that work in Romania, but that also in other countries, they prove that there are so many cases of discrimination that exist in countries, and many of these cases affect the development of Romani children. For instance, we have abuse police in many communities. We have forced evictions, but we also met cases where the Romani families have been banished or chased away from their communities. And let me just give you an example on that. Back in 2009, while I was still working with a Roma NGO there called Romani Cris, we went and documented a case in Harghita where, due to the fact that some young people in the community had a conflict, the whole community ended up in a lot of tensions, and Romani families, including their children, were chased away from the communities. Their houses were destroyed. One house was put on fire. Dogs were killed. The windows were broken. And all these people had to live in the woods for almost a month. It's not like it was enough. Almost every day, people from the community would go in the woods and chase these people and threaten them once again. I think that about 25 of children were there, and they were below the age of 7 years old. When the tension finished in the community and the municipality took some measure, there was no support for these children who have been going through a lot of chronic stress and trauma during this episode. And I think that there are a lot of consequences that we can talk about and we can hypothesize and imagine, but I just think that we really have to focus much more on discrimination, rejection, and stigma, because what I argue is that this phenomenon, they all decrease dramatically the chances of Romani children for healthy development. And I'm talking about emotional, cognitive, social development, but also I think that this phenomena also push for social isolation in some cases. Let me move to another type of risk factors, and this is the school environment. And what we know from the literature is that every child crosses kindergarten with certain fears, with expectations, with experiences that the child, and the way that the child perceived or is perceived or is treated by the school, it influences his or her attitudes towards the educational establishment. We also know that teacher expectations are assimilated by the children in building up their motivation for education, and we know that the effect of unfriendly behavior of teachers are more pronounced for children belonging to ethnic groups or to vulnerable and marginalized groups. Negative peer relations can lead to negative outcomes, such as school dropout or psychological difficulties. But what is happening in the Roma community, in the schools where Romani children go to kindergarten is that we document a lot of cases of discrimination and bullying, but there is no, I think, no solutions, no skills at the level of the schools to manage those. What was interesting in Romania is that the Ministry of Education, and I think a former colleague of mine, Mihaela Ionescu, was part of that project, was that they trained kindergarten teachers in order to be able to work with Romani communities, and they received some trainings on cultural diversity, on human rights, on Romani culture and Romani history, and this was a limited amount of teachers. So we went and interviewed teachers working with Romani children, both those who went through training and those who were not. And as you can see in these codes, you could easily find out that basically those who didn't go to the trainings, they have this idea that Romani children tend to drop out from school, and that there is a value in Romani culture of not going to schools. But if we look at those who went to training, what they are saying is that the number of Romani children in their kindergarten is increasing, and that's because they accept the children. And they also mentioned that these children who went through kindergarten in those environments, they also succeeded to go to high school. And I think these are powerful codes that teach us a lesson about what the school system means for the communities. There are also sources of vulnerabilities in the families, and I think that the literature mentioned as indicators the number of parents or adults in the house, the level of support to perform in education, but also the physical time that parents or caregivers they spend with children to read, to explore, or to play. And just to give you an example, I'll try to summarize everything. So 22% of Romani people over 14 years old in Romania cannot read and write, and therefore these adults are not able to support their children through readings and to support them to conduct their homeworks. There are also protective factors, and I think that the literature mentioned, among others, social maturity, also the extended family, the friends, and also the physical presence of the parents and other caregivers. In the Romani communities, we don't have data, so I just allow myself to mention some of the issues that I think, in my opinion, represent protective factors in these communities, but probably there are many others. So I think that breastfeeding is an interesting phenomenon. Then we have mother and child relationship, which is strong, and also the involvement of the extended family in raising children. And allow me to summarize and to finalize this presentation with a graphic, a scheme that I prepared and which I call the ecology of non-Roma privilege in early education, in early childhood, and which essentially summarize my talk. But I think that what I'm trying to do is to move the focus from the victimhood approach on Romani children, move it a little bit on the other problem, which is, I think, the society and the discrimination, and also all the privileges that the other children get. And when I talk about privilege, I think that every children is entitled normally to equal education, to health, to non-discrimination, but I think that only fewer And typically those individuals who belong to dominant majority population, they in fact exercise those rights. So at the end of the day, these rights are, although are intended both in theory and law to be the rights for all, at the end of the day, in practice, they become privileges for the majority groups. And let me just go briefly through this. I think that at the level of the family, for instance, a non-Roma child gets lower level of poverty, no experience of stigma and discrimination, lower rates of child mortality, lower transmission of lack of education. In kindergartens and in schools, there are more qualified teachers in non-Roma schools, better equipped classes, welcoming environments where teachers speak the same language and they share similar cultural values, and the teaching materials inform about the non-Roma history, about the non-Roma culture. And then in the neighborhoods, in the non-Roma neighborhoods, we don't have indiscriminatory access to kindergarten and daycare, and there is more access to water, there is more access to electricity. At the level of the society, I think that what we can say is that there is better access to power and resources. People who dominate power positions and design policies belong to the majority group, to the non-Roma groups, and I think this speaks for itself. And nevertheless, and here I think that non-Roma children and non-Roma communities, they had not experienced historic injustice, which is translated into slavery for 500 years, for instance, in Romania, Holocaust, and forced assimilation. I'll just stop here. Thank you, and I'm sorry for taking much of your time.
We'll hear from David Gregor, who will talk very specifically about the situation in Czech Republic.
So thank you, Margareta, for a wonderful introduction into risk factors and problems Roma face in Europe. I will not repeat it for Czech Republic, but all holds true. I could bring another cases or examples of burned houses of Roma children, Roma families and burned children even. I could bring another examples of bullying and fighting again. So this is really the case in the Czech Republic as well, even though you have seen from the graphs that Sarah showed that there are lower number of Romas in the Czech Republic, but the problems are the same. It makes me think that maybe it's hard to show another example. And I don't know if it holds true for another post-communist countries, but on the very general, you came to Eastern Europe with communist past and history that was full of ideology of equal educational opportunity. There was not real work for equal educational opportunity. It was a lot of wording, but not much action. I would say we could highlight some positive examples with disabled, but not many, I would say. But then demise of communist system in early 90s or 89 actually led people to think, okay, all the idea of equal opportunity is communist idea that we have to abolish together with the system. So it was rather replaced with school choice, and also you have to, and other neoliberal agenda that go against equity and equality in education. And also people were really holding the fixed mindsets, and also teachers opposite to open mindset, so usually attributing all the problems to the community. And here the great opportunity to have discussion on the global forum, where we could see that every society produced some marginalized kids coming from different regions of the world, etc. So this is useful for Central Europe to learn from the others that this is not just the Roma, they have their specifics, but each community produces deprived and underprivileged people, and these are mostly Roma in our Eastern Europe. But I want to present the Roma Early Childhood Inclusion Report that will be launched tomorrow, as you heard. You will have a chance to get a printed copy probably tomorrow here, so you could take it, and I will only briefly introduce it. Maybe I will skip some slides. So sponsoring agency, you see, authors, there were many authors. Arthur is here as author, the others didn't make it to come, but I will try to present all our common work, and also special thanks to Ilyana Sarafian and Philip Ramesh from Open Society Foundations that are not listed in authors but help us a lot. I will start with general, you know all these, why early childhood report? Because first of all, there are not many data in Czech Republic about early childhood, and because the returns on investment on early childhood are highest compared to later investments, but especially higher for children from low economic background, and we could refer to work of Heckman and many others that find it that. Our report has a structure that has executive summary, but then general introduction of inequalities in Czech educational system and early childhood. Later on, Roma children in preschool education, so some data available showing that discriminatory fashion and habits and for Roma is still working in Czech Republic. And third chapter as a recommendation and conclusions for Czech government and others working in the field. So about Czech educational system, mostly what we could say, and it's not early childhood, but it has not only early childhood. So it's highly differentiated, uses early tracking into different streams, tracks, based on evaluation of students' cognitive abilities. The first age of selection in Czech Republic after demise of communism is already at the age of 6, or even in some kindergartens. There are selective kindergartens that choose children with teaching language from the age of 4, and you have to pass the test to be able to get to that kindergarten, and they are state-funded. It's not. Then there are large differences between the schools and high relation between school socioeconomic status and school average results. But unfortunately, the data we have are usually about the older kids. So here you see the data from PISA study for the age 15, and you see that the Czech Republic has the highest, second highest after Japan, increase in test scores based on socioeconomic background of the family. We looked for better data. We found TIMSS data that is 8th graders, 14 years old, where we could document that from 95 till 2007, the differences between schools are growing. It almost doubled. So the situation of inequality in our country is getting worse and worse. But we are still too high, so we then take data from TIMSS 4th grade, that we are already at the age of 10, and it's primary school. And we again, when we analyze the data ourselves, we again see that the Czech Republic has very high percentage of variance explained by school socioeconomic background, having a ghetto schools, etc. So this is the Czech context in which, where middle-class families compete for the best school, then you have some rest of the school, and then you have Romani children entering the system, and they are saying, you shouldn't be even with us in the school. You are not good enough for the school. The mentality ability prevails in Czech Republic. So, but if we look further about early childhood education in Czech Republic, that's the first chapter, we see that there's a lack of public childcare provision for children younger than years of 3. The statistics is, after Poland, the second lowest in Europe. Insufficient kindergarten capacity and criteria for admission for kindergarten are unequal. We have estimates that is 27,000 children don't get the place in kindergarten from those who apply. And also, in that situation, when middle-class families compete for the place in kindergarten, then you have easily discriminatory practices taking place, like admission criteria, setting specific date when the parents must come to preschool to sign. If they don't come, or if they don't come first, they don't get the place, so Romani children without informations will not be there, and their parents. Or even criteria that mother has to be employed to get the place, priority. So unemployed parents of Romani children, no chance to get into kindergarten, even if they want to. Another characteristics is and that results in low involvement of disadvantaged backgrounds children in kindergartens, and also we have a practice of postponement of primary school attendance. that is the highest again in Europe. If you imagine that Czechoslovakia was one country and we are still neighboring countries, and in Slovakia the postponing of school starting age is 6, and they only 6 or 8% in Slovakia postponed the school by 1 year. But in Czech Republic, it's 15% in the last year, but it was 25%. Children postponing the age as being perceived by the school as unable to manage the school. So no school prepared for every child, but child has to be prepared for the school, and children entering the school are saying, okay, you could not come yet, you have to take 1 year or more outside the school. Another inequality, then we document Roma low participation, and there's a specific case in European courts when Czech Republic was found to be discriminatory against Roma. You could read more on the internet. We have no time to go into details, but it helped us in Czech Republic, this court decision, to bring the discussion about discrimination on the floor, but still you have many people opposing this is not discrimination, etc., etc. So education and Roma are very often tracked into different types of school. Previously these were special schools, and this was also what the European Court decision was talking against as discriminatory. Then the schools were renamed as practical basic school, and now even these should be changed, that no more practical basic school should exist, and by law. So the children, however, will be in the same school, unfortunately, if we don't support more inclusion, but with different name. So that's what happens usually in the Czech Republic. And to support inclusion and help children in mainstream schools, it's much more difficult. We see from this data we have gained that 40% of Roma children complete a compulsory education in practical basic school that were before these special schools that limit further access to upper secondary education. And the same study also showed that only 30% of Roma boys and 50% of Roma girls who had initially been enrolled in mainstream basic school finished their studies in the same school. So they were then sent to special school or practical basic school, as they are called now. So it would be great, we thought, to show data and show another data supporting the idea that this is still discriminatory and we should work and diminish these discriminatory practices. Unfortunately, I underline that there are no enough data. So we use the data that also Sarah showed you some graphs from, and it's good we have international data coming to collect data in our country so we could use them to advocate. So this is Roma Survey, UNDP, European Commission, and UNICEF together combine data. And you see that also from Czech data, we see that we have socially excluded localities where only 3 minutes, okay. Where in 2006 year we identified 300 socially excluded localities, where while in 2015 we already found, based on the same indicators, low unemployment, low education and many others, that there are already 600 excluded localities. So the problem is getting worse, not only in educational statistics but also in housing and other statistics. And we see that 87% of people living in these socially excluded localities are Roma in the Czech Republic. Comparative analysis of educational pathways of Roma and non-Roma pupils has shown that kindergarten attendance affects achievement of socially excluded children. Unfortunately, we don't have any randomized control trial, we don't have longitudinal data, but we only compare two groups in one time, so it's not very strong research evidence, but with better data we could get more stronger argumentation, but this won't change, I believe. So another findings, total of 28% of Roma children aged 3 to 6 were enrolled in preschool, compared with 64% of non-Roma children in that age group. Participation in preschool institution in socially excluded localities which I told you is now 600, is from 10 to 100%, so they differ a lot, even though they are excluded. And of course, the factors like how close the kindergarten is, and also if they are willing to accept Roma children, plays a role. Big differences between urban and rural locations, and also about the composition of preschools where Roma children attend. We see that more than half of Roma children attending kindergarten were enrolled in kindergartens with only a few Roma pupils. That is something we would like to have. In contrast, 13% attended institutions where they formed the majority, and 28% spent their time in kindergartens with 50-50 Roma and non-Roma enrolled children. So, for socially excluded Roma families, the financial aspects of preschool education plays a dominant role. And I'm showing what are the costs for meals, what are the costs for attending preschool. I may add that if you are postponed for school by 1 year, you have to pay the last year, what you don't have to if you go directly to school, etc., etc. I will not go into detail. Economic reasons, that's conclusion of the part 2, are among the reasons some Roma parents gave for not enrolling their children in kindergarten. A total of 48% said that they would definitely send their children aged 3 to 5 to kindergarten if it were free of charge. Another argument, and I don't see formulas, if they would be Roma assistants in the kindergartens, they would more happily send the child in the kindergarten. So, no more findings, conclusions and recommendations. One of the recommendations is to establish a standing national preschool working group. But it's in Czech Republic we have a saying or idiom that is contra to British idiom. The British idiom is you can't have your cake and eat it. The Czech idiom is the wolf has eaten and the goat remained whole. And this is actually what happens if you want to change something. We change it on the paper, so we change the name of the school rather than changing inclusion. So sometimes when we establish the group, we just solve the problem without really solving something. So there are many prerequisites how the group should work to really bring about some change. Then we should support more inclusive education, financially, by personnel, etc. And there are some more concrete recommendations that would be maybe hard for you to understand because this is for really context Czech specific idea that we recommended and we will present on Thursday to Czech government, and we hope to listen and also react, not only verbally. So thank you for your attention, and tomorrow you could get a copy, hopefully here.
So now we'll hear from Arthur, who will again move us back to a kind of pan-European perspective on Roma policy.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, so if I could start here with a policy response, and then we're going to have a research response. But as I understand it, my job is to try and pull together the points coming from these two important research documents and to see what implications it has for effective policy. And it fits so well into the objectives of this workshop. Here are the pictures of, just random pictures of the way many, if not a majority of Roma families are forced to live in a modern day Europe. So first of all, the value of sound research evidence. And we certainly appreciate very much the two presentations we've had, despite the pressure on time, and our timekeeper over here holding up the red card. But I think we've got a good essence of how valuable the research is and how important it is in a context where there is an endemic prejudice towards the people that one is trying to help. Because it is the research evidence that undermines the prejudice. You think that, but wait a minute, this is what we found out is the truth. So that's very valuable. I have to thank you both for the contribution that you've made. That's splendid. Thank you. There were differences, I think, and not only coming from the research, but differences in context, and I just want to spend a wee bit of time on that. The differences in Romania, I think the policy there is that there is a statutory 5 to 6 year old kindergarten year prior to compulsory education, and that's an important development. And also a national development is that there is a National Council for Combating Discrimination in Romania, which is a kind of quasi-government body, very effective, and at the moment they are engaged in mass professional training on race equality. We went through that in the UK in the 1980s, and a lot of consultancy firms became very rich for example, providing training for the army or the police on race equality. But this is going on in Romania, and earlier in September and October, I was part of the training of 90 primary school and kindergarten teachers, and also, more importantly perhaps, was 40 school inspectors. So that's one aspect of work that is going on in Romania. And the importance of a gathering like this is that one country can start learning from the practice of another country. The difference is perhaps, and 2 points arising coming from the Czech Republic. We are in the middle here, I think, still in the middle of a very interesting and rich debate about which way should the policy go on early childhood education. Should there be a statutory, compulsory year 5 to 6, or should it be more open as an entitlement? And I think it's very healthy that that debate is going on in the Czech Republic, because all the issues about inclusion aren't as clear-cut as they might seem, and David and his colleagues are also participating in that national debate. The other important thing to say is that there have been, in the last couple of years, modest legislative developments which will facilitate a kind of screwing down a little bit more of the policy initiatives which are needed in reality and in practical terms in schools for real inclusive education, rather than just the language. The similarities or the risk factors, and I benefit from the terminology here, across the two countries are stark and distressing. We've heard the differences, but the similarities are there, and I think David said the situation is very similar across Europe. Structural hindrances to access to quality and unsegregated early childhood education and care is mainly rooted in a combination. I've tried to list these in different colours so they're easy to take in, but extreme poverty, and we've heard a lot about that already this morning. Low family educational capital, social exclusion, geographical marginalisation, dangerous and unhealthy living conditions in environments of high stress, linked to grossly neglected infrastructure and utilities. We've heard about that also, and the damaging impact it has on young children, and widespread institutional and public racism and discrimination. So, the cards are stacked against Roma children across Europe in terms of their situation and the general attitudes which exist both in governments and general public, which really hinders their opportunities to have a good quality education with dignity and respect. And here, I have to say, it's a hidden disgrace in Europe. There's not a lot of publicity about it. The international organisations have been superb over the last 20 years, and if all their reports had been put into this room, we'd have found it difficult to get in ourselves, because UNDP, the World Bank, UNICEF, OSF, the Roma Education Fund, the number of heavy documents describing the research evidence is absolutely massive. But governments tend to be pretty silent on this issue. It's not high profile. and that betrays all the politics of the situation. How am I doing for time, Sarah? Okay. 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes. Right. So this is the policy response. These are the things that look as though they've helped in different parts where we've had good pockets of really excellent practice developing. And these are the issues. I'll go over these very quickly. Ratified and transposed anti-discrimination legislation, human rights, rights of the child, and for governments to be responsible for seeing that they are implemented and for that to seep into the culture of the professional groups who are delivering public services. I'm rushing, but all of this will be in the final report of the conference. Legal prescriptions on inclusive education, certainly training of teachers and all adults working in schools, that includes everybody, on what inclusive education is about, is absolutely vital. And that's, of course, followed by the obvious thing. The people who are out monitoring and inspecting and evaluating inclusive education need to be superbly well trained to be able to make correct judgments and feedback to government. Policy responses, kindergartens and schools, outreach. This conference is about investing and reaching out to marginalised children. So the fact that schools are there, and I remember in the UK we had a great argument with the ministry saying, well, if the Roma don't go to school, tough cheddar, tough cheese, because the schools are there, so if they want to take education, they can go. If that's your philosophy, you've lost the plot. So there has to be a structural professional outreach function for marginalised children living in communities at the margins. And ministries of education have to implement realistic inclusion policies. So it needs a ministerial analysis of all the hindering factors that stops inclusion, that stops children participating freely and fully in quality education, and then for each of those hindrances to be identified and dealt with. So we are rushing now. I will rush very quickly. Yes. These will be in the presentations. And, of course, the importance of kindergartens, in particular being really welcoming places which affirm children's identity irrespective of their background. And these are all, I'm teaching you to suck eggs, as we would say in English, because these are such obvious points, aren't they? And the risk factors, again, from your presentation, are enormous. And I think they outweigh massively, the threatening risk factors outweigh massively the protective factors within Roma communities. And for that reason, I think poverty reduction, you asked us, the organisers asked us to end up with some conclusions and recommendations to our presentation. So these are they: poverty reduction, free provision, and David has mentioned all the things that need to be put in place within a inclusive policy, outreach, institutional provision and support, I've mentioned that, provision of safe environments, health, nutrition, infrastructure, safe water, all these things have to be there, as we heard from a previous talk about horizontal and vertical connection of rights, and robust legal sanctions against hate speech and anti-gypsy talk and language, particularly in the media and professional gatherings. So why are such comprehensive actions are needed to be part of ensuring equal educational opportunities? There is a need, seriously, for governments to constructively take action to undo the damage that has been done by governments themselves over a number of centuries towards this particular community. And because Roma continue to suffer ubiquitous race hatred in Europe, and this underpins everything that is happening and that we see. And I have to say that unless some governments start taking action, including some international organisations, we come uncomfortably close to the criteria for crimes against humanity. Tough talking, but okay, I've thrown it in, and it's, I think, is worth keeping in the back of our minds if you start looking at the criteria. So, Sarah, I'm sorry.
So our final presentation is from Radosveta Dimitrova, and she'll be giving a research perspective.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and share this brief research reaction. As a developmental cross-cultural psychologist, I'm conducting my research with Roma children and families mainly in Bulgaria, but in the last 5 years, it has been extended in most of the post-communist countries, Czech Republic, Romania included. And I'm focusing on strengths and assets, and I'm trying to figure out how we can promote those and improve well-being of those kids and their families. I would like to focus along two major points that have been raised by previous speakers. One deals with what we know about Roma children and families, and the other is what we can do. And I will provide some brief recommendations. What we know, of course, we have to be aware, and we cannot ignore the enormous challenges that these communities faced. And this deficit-oriented approach, focusing on how they're deficit or they're lacking in competences compared to mainstream majority populations that might be. And also the risk factors, Magda has listed most of them, and they, of course, have a tremendous impact, a negative impact on child development and later success in life. From research perspective, also, I'm also struggling with the sample representatives. These are highly or highly difficult to access groups and to work with. So maybe a major challenge is also how much these samples are representative, or do we really reach all the kids that are at the margins or that are not in the schools or institutions that cannot participate in our research and interventions, or face multiple discriminations, like in the morning it was mentioned this intersectionality of multiple discrimination factors and experiences. And what we know, I would like to focus on assets and strengths in psychological literature. There has been some increased research and publications in resources within a family and community that Magda also mentioned some of those. So we know that a strong peer network, school and community connectedness and involvement are very beneficial in promoting healthy child development. But also, if we move in older ages like youth, we have identity resources. So Roma identity, maintaining Roma cultural traditions, and also religion in some cases is also beneficial. What we also, I would like to think of, and we need to keep in mind that policy across countries differ of their integration or strategies to improve conditions of Roma. So indirectly, those country-level factors may affect health of kids. And I would like to share also a research question that, of course, maybe we can open to discussion later on, which probably applies to most of the similarly discriminated and marginalized groups of kids and families, is to think about how our universal theories or knowledge apply to the Roma, and how we interpret the differences in success and competence. And this brings me to the notion that has been brought yesterday by Kofi, about the measurement gap. So how much we think about this context sensitivity in research policy and practice. And I would like to end with two recommendations based from my experience and work and research with Roma communities. First, I think it's very important to keep in mind and promote culturally informed research policy and practice, and also actively engaged parents, teachers, schools, community at all levels. Because we often talk about the Roma minority, but sometimes neglecting the majority or the dominant group. So what are their attitudes, or how the school is receiving, or the organizations or institutions, how they're treating the Roma and their families. And finally, focus on assets. And remember that Roma kids and families have potentially built-in strengths And we need to build on these trends and not assume that they're only characterized by adversities and deficits. And finally, I would like to end up with a success story. Can I ask the technical assistants to project the one slide that I have? Maybe, yeah. This is one of my participants of my research. This is Vicky, and she won last year national essay competition on Roma, and it has been translated in many languages and inserted on this website of the European Network for Romani Studies, and it describes very nicely what is her experience to be a Roma girl, but he's also a success case, and you're welcome to visit this website and read her story. It's very nice and touchy. Thank you so much.
I think we've had a fantastic group of presentations, and some of the phrases that I know that stick out, or the ideas that stick out from the presentations, are the idea that the majority children really are a benefit from an enormous series of advantages that they come into primary school with, let's say, on the basis of their early childhood experiences, where, to use your words, Arthur, the cards are stacked against Roma children all across Europe, and it could be that it is a crime against humanity. We learned that we should be, in our research and our approaches, addressing the attitudes of the majority and also building on the strengths of the Roma communities, and try, nonetheless, to get the data that we really need to make the kinds of policy and practice changes. I'm not going to say any more because I think people must have questions that they would like to ask, and what I was going to suggest is that we take 3 questions from the audience and then ask panel members to respond to those 3 questions, so we can take 3 at the same time. So if there's anybody that has a question, I see one over here. Hero? Okay, Mark. So we have our 3 questions. Okay, so there's Mark over here, Hero over here, and yeah, it's okay. There are 3 microphones. One will come to you. One over here. And Angela, yeah. Mark and Angela, yeah? Would you like to start here? Do you have a microphone? And are you
Sure.
To go?
So thank you for the wonderful presentations. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on the status of Roma leadership, which in different countries has played very important roles in increasing access to quality education, but particularly in the early childhood field, whether either in Romania or in the Czech Republic or other countries. I guess both instances of successful leadership and then what that means for system-wide initiatives to foster greater leadership on this issue in early childhood in particular.
Mark, can we hear your question as well? I think we'll take all 3 questions at the same time so that the panelists can make responses as well.
Yes, I'm just noticing the similarity of what's going on in these presentations and what has happened within the United States with the civil rights movements in the 60s, and whether or not there is a push or at a federalist, or again, Europe is much more of a confederation than a republic, but whether or not there is a pan-European movement for such civil rights type of movements, because clearly, as was mentioned, there's a lot of evidence that this is going on, but yet this is a systematic problem.
Thank you. And Angela, your question?
Yes. What is the reason given in the Czech Republic for having to test children for entry into kindergarten, and then these children become adolescent and young adults? Can you talk a little bit about the profile of these children when they become adolescent and young adults? And thank you for a wonderful presentation.
So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to ask if Gregor can make the first response and respond to the Czech context specifically, and then we can take the first and second questions together, which are really connected in a way. It's about Roma leadership, it's about the civil rights movement, it's about how communities change the early childhood education. And what we'll do after you can answer the first question, Gregor, is we'll go across the panel and have people answer the questions that are related to the rights and activist movement. So, Gregor.
Yes, so thank you. If I understand well the question, entry to kindergarten, this is not so common as for primary schools. I just mentioned that it also happens, and it's linked to selective primary schools, because to get to selective primary school, you have to pass the entrance examinations. And to many primary schools that are selective, they are also attached as one institution kindergartens. So they move the entrance, and usually the idea is that if you are accepted to kindergarten, you will get easily to, let's say, language school in primary school. So they moved the entrance examination to kindergarten, but this is not a big scale. I just wanted to mention it, that it happens, and it shouldn't happen at any age before, let's say, 15 or something that is common. So I just wanted to mention it as curiosity. But it highlights the Czech mentality, that is really the mentality-driven mindset, that there's a belief that ability is something that is inherent to every child IQ, and we could best prepare the children only if we divide them in different streams based on their ability that we could measure, etc. And because the education system is organized in that way, through all, let's say, 6, 8, 11, again, selection, etc., so people think this is a natural thing to do. It has historical roots. So actually in 1920s, there was a professor, Prihoda, studying with in the US, and he came back and he said we should abolish tripartite track system, but the discussion went long because, of course, I'm too long. So it was it was a long discussion that we should abolish tracking, elite tracking, and we should not select based on ability. But then in 1948, it were the communists who abolished it. So it became a communist idea instead of understanding this as equal opportunity as a comprehensive system. And therefore, when the communist system was demised, they said, okay, all these ideas were communist. And they refer to our close neighbors like Germany and Austria that also have elite tracking and say this is the Western thinking we should follow now.
So if the remainder of the panelists would respond to the other questions on the status of Roma leadership, particularly successes related to early childhood education, and whether or not there's a pan-European movement around Roma activism, particularly maybe similar to the civil rights movement.
Yeah, I love the question. It's a great question, especially because I was interested to talk a little bit about the good practices, and the organizers said, no, focus on that during the breakout sessions. So I'll take the chance to talk a little bit about that now. And I've been around for quite a while in the Roma movement to notice that there is a change, at least in the country that I come from. And I remember back in the 90s, immediately after the communism, when my father was a local activist, that most of the gatherings of the Roma activists were at our house because we have no office. There are no money for organizing. So if I look back then and look what is going on now, and we have at least 200 organizations in Romania working on Roma rights, many of them are Roma-led, and there is a strong commitment to Roma rights. I think we really went a long way, but it's not enough, and I think we are just at the beginning. And in relation to I think the importance of the work of Roma organizations in our countries, I just mentioned some of the small pieces that the organization that I used to work for brought at the level of policies in Romania. So, for instance, in Romania we have a health mediator systems and the school mediator systems. Both these human resources and these projects were piloted first by Romani Cris, the organization that I'm proud to be part of. And it started all with 20 young people, 20 women that were trained as health mediators in Roma communities, and it finally ended up in the national policy, which is now financed by the Ministry of Health, and which essentially helps children with vaccination, with enrollment to school, to kindergarten, and with many other aspects that are related specifically to education and health. There is much more to do there to create more sensitivity on early childhood development, but I think that OSF and ISA are doing a good job with the Romani networks idea. Then I think there is some progress also on early childhood development, and again, organizations have started projects at local level, at this level, at this point, I think they are piloted in small communities, but there is an interest of Roma organizations to show that along with the improvement at the level of the school environment in terms of training of teachers and better infrastructure, there is also a need for work with the families and communities in order to build up the human capital in our communities. And I'll finish with one idea about the civil rights movement, which has been an inspiration for many of us. And in my work in Romania, I've used the work on segregation in the States, and also in the Czech Republic it happened as much on segregation, that we use strategic litigation and some of the tools that the civil rights movement in the States used in order to stop segregation. And we've been successful, at least at the level of developing policies and legislation to forbid discrimination and this kind of these forms of inequalities. But I think that we are in a different moment, and there is a whole discussion about the differences between the civil rights movement and the incapacity of the Roma movement to mobilize as much as the civil rights movement succeeded to do so. And one argument that I bring on the table normally is that, well, the context is very much different. Back then, I think that whereas we dealt with de jure segregation and separation of the black community in the US, in Europe, I think that Roma were always in a survival mode. So they legally now, they have access to rights and so on. So these survival mode do not actually push them towards having more emotions and a mobilization that gathers communities, not only activists from NGOs. I'm sorry for taking so much time.
Arthur, would you like to make any comments on the rights movement? No?
I'd hesitate to before you've spoken, I think. Just as an example, I wouldn't like to speak for anywhere else, but in terms of the UK, the leadership within the Roma Gypsy and Traveller community has been really interesting. It's been used by government in a racist way. They've played one group off against another of representation. They've also said, what can we do? How can we develop policy when there are so many different views? Until the communities are unified and have one voice, then we will talk to them. And, you know, it's just a device for not doing anything. But when they have to talk, they invite representatives, so-called representatives from the community who are ill-funded in the main to have a real powerful role in representation of the community, and then the officials from the ministries roll out and put the invisible ear plugs in and nod and listen, but don't do anything. And I don't think they really take seriously, this is true in the UK, they don't take seriously that the Roma leadership NGOs are played off against each other, and there's no really serious attention to listen seriously to them. But that's a negative view, but I'm only talking about the UK.
I just briefly would like to report a successful example of Roma leadership in early childhood education. It's an NGO, Amelipe. I think it collaborates with Open Society Foundations and many other organizations, yeah,
The leaders here.
that promote education and work with Roma communities. And actually this organization is run by Roma teachers, and it covers more than 90% of the schools in the whole country, starting from at all stages of education. And they're really quite successful and well represented also in major committees in the government, and really people listen to them, although it's, of course, it's a great resistance to give leadership or voices to Roma in Bulgaria. But this, yeah, I was referring to Bulgaria. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if you were entranced and interested in the discussions on the Roma community and you'd like to continue that discussion, there will be a chance at the breakout sessions in the afternoon, and we have representatives of several Roma NGOs, and Magda will be leading a session with Romani Pen and the Open... oh gosh, I forgot. And the Slovak Foundation, the Step by Step Foundation, the Open Door NGO, which is going to be presenting all their experiences. Now I have a surprise announcement for you. I announced the arrival of, first thing is that our panel, we should thank our panel and clap for our panel. And I invite the panel members to take their seats back in the audience. The surprise announcement is that Kevin Brown is here. He's arrived, and he, in order to catch us up so we're ready in the afternoon, to start the afternoon fresh without any leftover business from the morning, Kevin Brown is going to provide us with his presentation, which is from the session that Vesna led, and it's focused on children who are under 3 years old who are living in institutions across Europe. And Kevin is the director for the Center for Forensic and Family Psychology at Nottingham University. And Kevin, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I won't waste my time on excuses and just thank Lufthansa for getting me here eventually. Right, so I'd like to talk about the latest survey funded by OSF and also with support of UNICEF. And it began some time ago in 2003 with a Daphne project, which was the first time where we'd actually monitored very closely the number of children in institutional care across the whole of the European region of 54 member states. At that time, the picture looked like this. Not all 54 responded, and we were concentrating primarily on the EU countries in Western and Central Europe. And you can see at that time, in 2003, the variation across Europe was dramatic, with some countries having no young children in institutional care, and others, like the Czech Republic, having 6 in every 1,000, which at the time the press picked up, and the Czech government was very upset, as you can understand, not knowing that they were the highest in Europe. They said that perhaps I'd got the wrong data, but we'd actually given them the opportunity to correct the data on 2 occasions, so we felt we had the latest data. So at that time, it was what you'll see later in this presentation. They've done wondrous things since. We also were involved in looking at the consequences of individual care at home in family-based care in comparison to residential care institutions. My team was concentrating and studying behavioral consequences, where Charlie Nelson and Charlie Zena were concentrating on neural consequences, which you heard about this morning. And these 2 documents went to the UN General Assembly. And basically, as we all know from this morning, institutional care damages young children. And what you need to think about, and this was from our behavioural observations, that infants in institutional care spend up to 18 hours in their cots. The number estimated is considerable. 44,000 young children under 3 are in institutional care. And so UNICEF began a campaign ending placing children under 3 in institutions, a call for action. And that was based on a UN General Assembly legislation, or guidelines, I should say, saying no child under 3 should be in institutional care. Well, here is the latest 2013 statistics for children over 18. And you can, sorry, under 18. So these are children under 18, and you can see there's still vast amounts of children in institutional care across the whole region. For the under 3s, you can see again that there's vast amounts of children under 3 in institutional care, and the number in red, which is the number in residential care, is still considerable, especially in Central Asia. And foster care, though, in comparison to 2003, is increased and is now beginning to be the majority of children in family-based care rather than institutional care. Nevertheless, there's still a lot of work to be done. Now, we were the first to actually, we didn't have statistics on Monaco in 2003, so we don't know what they were like then, but they now represent, although they have a very small population, the highest in Europe. And you can see the figures for all the countries in Europe that replied, which is 46 in total out of the 54. And the number in red, those countries in red, have actually increased in the number of children under 3 in institutional care since 2003, not decreased. So Malta, Moldova, Albania, Croatia, Poland, Austria, Tajikistan and Norway. Norway is so marginal because they've only got under 10 anyway, but so they've gone up because they've now got 15. So I think Norway we can forgive, but the rest of them, instead of going down in the number of children in institutional care under 3, they've gone up. And this is despite a lot of investment by NGOs like Lumos in Moldova. And so we need to look at some of the reasons more deeply about how they've gone up, and also why Austria has gone up by 3 in every 10,000 children, from 7 in 2003 to now 10. We need to look at the reasons why that is. My guess is that it's probably not Austrian children, but refugee children and children from abroad that are languishing in the institutions. The numbers in foster care, you can see here, per 10,000. And again, you can see those countries that have high rates of foster care are those countries that are reducing the number in institutional care, although not at the rate we would like. Here, the numbers in red, the countries in red, I should say, are those that hardly have foster care or have just begun with very few families available. So those countries in red have yet to develop foster care in any great extent, although some of them are trying. Some surprises in that one are Spain and Italy, which still are behind, and Belgium in developing any real alternative family-based care system. Countries which significantly have significantly less children under 3 in residential care compared to 2003 are the following: Hungary, Belgium, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Spain, Romania, Finland, Belarus, Estonia, Russia, Netherlands and Bulgaria. So that's what I say about the Czech Republic. Although they've still got a very high number of children in institutional care compared to other parts of Europe, they have done wonders to reduce it by -22 per 10,000. Nevertheless, that still leaves them with something like 32 in every 10,000 in institutional care, which is still too much. In Slovakia, you've already seen a graph that the majority of those children are Roma, and a significant proportion in Czech Republic are Roma. So this institutional care has a lot to do with discrimination, not only against various ethnic groups, but also against children with disabilities, which are way overrepresented in institutional care in most countries in our region. Countries with significantly more children, as I highlighted in red, are the ones we talked about earlier. And really, we need to look at those countries in more detail and find out what exactly is going wrong there, where it's increasing. Because now all countries know that it's wrong to put children under 3 in institutional care. We had a great deal of trouble getting this data this time around. In 2003, everybody was boasting about it, thinking it was a good service for children. In 2013 to 15, what they wanted to do was hide the figure, and we had a great deal of trouble getting the information. The countries with children under 3 overrepresented. Now, this is as a proportion of all children in institutional care. So you would expect 0 to 3 to be about 1/6 or less of the number of children in institutional care if children under 3 were put there by chance in terms of other age groups. Well, in these countries, they are overrepresented in comparison to the other age groups. So you're more likely to be placed in institutional care as a young child, 0 to 3, than at any other age group in these countries: Latvia, Armenia, Bosnia, Macedonia, Bulgaria, Kosovo, Albania, and Turkey. Again, we need to understand why that's the case. And my guess is that they haven't developed foster carers that they're confident or trained to care for babies, and they take a medical approach, rather like Sweden, who still have children in babies in institutional care, thinking that these children need medical care rather than family-based care. And that's an attitude we have to change. The other myth that I want to dispel is both in 2003 and in 2013, the distribution hasn't changed very much. In Western countries, European countries, where there's well-developed child protection procedures and systems, 2/3 of the people in the children under 3 in institutional care are there because of child abuse and neglect. Very few are there because of disability, only 4%. And very few are there because they've been abandoned, because they've gone for adoption. But about the same rate are there because of being unavailable as a parent, either being in prison or being in a mental health institution, etc., or being impoverished and economic migration, working abroad. Now, look at that compared to Eastern and Central Asia. In those countries, it's more likely that they're there because of disability, 23%, because they're abandoned, 33%, and the same rate of unavailable parents. 6% are orphans, but only 14% are there because of abuse and neglect. Now that, to me, isn't surprising, because child protection systems and recognition of physical abuse and sexual abuse is pretty impoverished in those countries. They've not reached the same standard of detection and referral as we see in Western Europe. So it's no surprise to me that children in Eastern Europe and Central Asia are there for other reasons. Not that they should be in institutional care in Western Europe, they should be in foster care. But so there are different reasons, and you can see that there's much more prejudice against abandoned children and disabled children, and possibly children from different ethnic groups. Now, the social reasons for residential care, the reasons we think residential care exists, is a lack of community nurses and social workers. And I'd like to emphasize here that patronage nursing and community nurses is not a communist idea. It was actually an idea in 1852 that started in Manchester in England. So those countries that threw patronage nursing out with the communist system, we are now working very hard in UNICEF to re-establish it, because it was a good idea and still is, and is the best idea to prevent abandonment and violence in the family, according to research. So a lack of home-based assessments of children in need and their families, and working with families. Do we have to remove children from alcoholic families, or can we rehabilitate those alcoholic parents? Lack of free universal prevention services to reduce child abuse, neglect and abandonment. Weak targeted interventions at families high risk of child abuse and neglect, with doctors and nurses telling mothers with disabled children that they're best in an institution rather than to take them home, with daycare support. Slow development of therapeutic foster care and other forms of foster care are the main reasons. So this is what I'd like to see in future: foster care, community services, providing adequate services for families in need, foster care for those families that aren't coping and where the children has to be removed for a short time or long term, and residential care only for children who are about to harm themselves or harm others, where they need specialist care. These are the books that we've produced to actually deinstitutionalize children. We have a model of how to transform an institution, which countries have now adapted. It's on the Better Care Network. It's also been adapted and adopted by Lumos and Hope and Homes for Children. So this model, a 10-step model of how to transform an institution. And we have done this in, this is a Polish institution, a very famous one, that was transformed into a polyclinic of non-residential services in Warsaw, including a mother and baby unit and daycare facilities, instead of being a 24-hour residential care. Physiotherapists, occupational therapists, people that work with disabled children don't do it on a 24-hour basis. So we don't need disabled children there for medical reasons 24 hours a day. They can go to daycare while their parents are at work and receive those medical care services. And mother-baby units are absolutely essential to prevent abandonment. We know this from research in Ukraine, where we've developed counsellors on maternity units together with mother-baby units, and the amount of abandonment has dropped dramatically, and similar research has been carried out in Romania. So we know this works. So why are we institutionalising babies by themselves, when we know if we institutionalise them with mothers in need, that the likelihood is the mother will keep the baby? We've also got to work against the prejudice which still is in our system in Poland and Ireland, for example, where mothers who have children out of wedlock are discriminated against. This is archaic, but it still exists in Ireland and Poland. And we need to challenge that as well, about the attitudes towards single mothers, and encourage them to bring up their children rather than put them in institutions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your patience as we cut into lunch by 20 minutes. So that cuts down your lunch. We have 40 minutes. We need to stay on time. We will start promptly at 1:30 so that we don't cut down on the sessions and these really great presentations. Anyone interested in institutionalized care, you should go to that breakout session and hear more about it. So the lunch is in the Loretta room, which is on the second floor, but you kind of have to go down and then go around and go back up the other staircase or take the elevator. Thank you. Yeah, right where breakfast was, yeah.